Should Anthony Yarde fire Tunde Ajayi? This question has re-emerged following Anthony Yarde's defeat to Artur Beterbiev on the weekend, and I'm going to give my 2 cents on this. This is a question that many boxing fans ask when any fighter suffers a defeat, but especially Anthony Yarde, because people have been calling for him to sack Tunde Ajayi for years now, even before he left, before he lost to Sergey Kovalev in 2019. And I think we have to be real. Tunde's far from a fan favourite, so there are a lot of people who just want to see Yarde sack Tunde because they don't like Tunde, and that's your prerogative if you're one of those people. But I actually want to explore and give my 2 cents on this situation from the perspective of, is it a necessary move for Anthony Yarde going forward? And for reference, I want to use the video of one of my boxing brothers, that is Henry, over at Boxing on the Edge. He did a great video on this subject, and he thinks that Yarde shouldn't sack Tunde. He thinks he should stay with him and continue on. I disagree with that, to go straight into it, but I must say, and I encourage you to check out Henry's video, which I'll leave a link to in the description box, because I feel it's a very objective and very nuanced answer that he gives, and rationale that he gives to his opinion. And I must say, great work as ever. So if you guys haven't checked it out, watch it. I'll leave the link in the description box. Very good video. And I'm going to use some of the points that Henry highlights, because I think they are very important. And now, firstly, to give some context, as I say, Tunde Ajayi isn't a very popular person in British boxing, but let's be real, most people aren't able to separate their personal feelings and likes and dislikes when it comes to giving appraisals of fighters and trainers and people in general, so on and so forth. Whereas with me, I feel like I can do that quite well. And Tunde Ajayi, even though he's not my kind of person, I have to give credit where it's due, because I feel that he's done a very good job with Anthony Yarde. And, being objective, I think we have to consider all things. And I think it's quite clear to see that Anthony Yarde is a very talented individual, very talented athlete. He strikes me as someone who would excel in many sports, and has just happened to choose boxing and has done very well for himself. I think he's a very fast learner, because this is someone who started boxing late, but has some very good technique, although, does leave a bit to be desired. And so, credit to Anthony Yarde for his natural ability, but also credit to Tunde Ajayi, because he clearly understands good coaching practice. He clearly has quite a good boxing brain. And, you can only gauge so much, because we're really, when it comes down to assessing a trainer, you have a bit of footage that you can see on channels like IFL, Boxing Media. You can see how or you get a glimpse into how the trainer is training the fighter. You can also listen to what the trainers say in between rounds and during the fights themselves. You can also get an insight through interviews. However, boxing can be quite a secretive sport. But from what I've seen of Tunde Ajayi, I think he is a good coach. A lot of people kind of criticize him when they see him on the pads with Anthony Yarde, and they see the Mayweather-esque pad work, and they say, oh, that's all for show. They don't really understand that pad work. They say it's all for show. It's just circus tricks. It's routine. They say, oh, they've practiced it. It's a routine, so it's not so special after all. But just as on a tangent, these people don't understand that is really the point. The point of that pad work is designed to be routine, because routine builds habit, and habit allows you, or habit displays that you've drilled something. And so when you're well drilled, it shows that you're investing a lot of time into your endeavor, in this case boxing. And that's why amateurs are amateurs, because they haven't had any exposure to training time and drills to develop good technical habits. And obviously drilling can go both ways, so you do have to have an eye for these things. But for the most part, when I look at Anthony Yarde's Anthony Yarde's movement in the ring, his technique, I'm generally quite impressed. Although, when it comes to his arsenal, his repertoire, in particular his how astute he is defensively, I think it does leave a lot to be desired. And if we look at Anthony Yarde's development from the Kovalev fight, which is his first loss, to the Beterbiev fight, of course, his most recent loss, I have seen little from Yarde that shows me that he is evolving as a fighter. Because yes, these have been losses that have been, damaging because he's been stopped. Of course, he got stopped by Kovalev in the 11th, stopped by Beterbiev in the 8th. They were such prime opportunities to really take a lot and learn from them, especially the Kovalev fight, where it was Yarde's first step up. And he can look back at that, because that is a very dense fight. There is a lot to learn. And of course, where it's your first loss, it exposes you to your weaknesses. But I just don't think that it has been absorbed by not just Yarde as a fighter, but Tunde as a trainer. And so I think, I'm not trying to say that Tunde is a bad trainer. The opposite. I've just spent 4 or 5 minutes expressing that I think he's a good trainer, although I do feel like he has taken Yarde as far as he can. And that is to a high level. Yarde is a legitimate world level fighter in a very tough division. However, does he want to settle for being the world title challenger? Or does he want to be the world champion? And so, in my personal opinion, as I say, I think Tunde Ajayi has taken Yarde as far as he can go. And now, there's nothing to say that if Yarde goes on to take on a new trainer, that he'll then become a world champion. Because, as I say, light heavyweight is a very difficult division. There are a lot of dangerous, talented fighters. That's what I've said constantly about Yarde, is he's a big puncher and a talented fighter, but he happens to be in a division full of big punchers and talented fighters. It's really a shark tank, light heavyweight. It has been for a while. So there's no guarantee that if Yarde changes trainers, that all of a sudden he breaks through the glass ceiling and becomes a champion. However, I do think it's worth exploring now. I think it's worth him going out, looking for a trainer who understands what he does well, so won't change too much, won't erase too much of Tunde's work, quote unquote, because there are things that Yarde does well, but just understands Yarde's deficiencies and looks to add to them. I'm not sure who that would be as a trainer. I haven't really thought about it, to be honest. That'll be a video for the future. But that being said, there's also a flip side to that. Another thing that Henry brought up, and that is how there is a bond, there's a union between Anthony Yarde and Tunde Ajayi. And, some people are going to scoff at this. They're going to say, oh, you big softies, it's fighting. You just need a trainer who's going to get you ready, that kind of stuff. Well, that's not the case, because boxing's a very lonely sport. You have to factor in that when you go into a fight, it's you, your opponent, and the referee. And you have to leave your team. You have to leave your trainer outside the ropes. So it can be a very tough environment, boxing, to navigate, not just physically, but mentally, psychologically. But one thing that Yarde and his camp have is a very high motivational and confidence climate, if that makes sense. Their psychological, the vibes you get from them, there's a lot of confidence, a lot of motivation, a lot of discipline in that camp. And yeah, it can be a little bit cringy when the whole lines in the camp thing, but that's just their thing. And if you see how Yarde conducts himself, that clearly has a bolstering effect. At least I think so, and I think many people agree with me. Anthony Yarde, not only is he a remarkable athlete, but he's a remarkably confident person, because we do have to factor in, yeah, Yarde isn't a world champion, but he's come close, particularly in that Sergey Kovalev fight, and he certainly had his moments against Beterbiev, who, let's be real, people, he's a monster. And it is a bit of a meme, once again, but the whole 12 amateur fights, not many or hardly any step ups to the pro, it is tiring, and it's You know, we lose our patience with it, but it does play a part. But despite that inexperience, Anthony Yarde, very confident when he goes into the ring, very self-assured of his own ability. And you can see reflections of that in his team, especially in Tunde Ajayi. So how much of that is a back and forth, those two bouncing off each other to really maintain that motivation and that confidence. And even if there's a coach who's technically better than, or technically, a bit more educated, maybe even a better coach than Tunde Ajayi, would Anthony Yarde still have that same motivation? Would he still have the same confidence that he has with that other coach? And now, these are questions that nobody can really know until we're looking back at Yarde's career, and if he does go to different trainers, we can assess and give our 2 cents on the matter. I'm just asking the questions, and as I've said, I'm in favour of Yarde going elsewhere and looking for another coach. Although I do have to factor in, I do have to acknowledge, as Henry did in his video, all the other elements there are to the coach-fighter relationship. Because it isn't just what the coach can teach you, it's how they make you feel, how they guide you, how they comfort and console you if need be, how they get you ready mentally, emotionally, how well do they know you? Can they resonate and relate to you, and vice versa? So there are a lot of things that go into it. But one thing, I've talked about Tunde, and I think he's done a good job technically, but he's reached his limit. I've spoken about how psychologically I feel like he does a lot for Yarde. But then I've also talked about the inexperience of Anthony Yarde and how I feel that has really been his biggest weakness. If you look at throughout his career, there are just so few step-ups. He went from fighting Travis Reeves to Sergey Kovalev to, I don't know, some guy in the backwaters of Spain to fighting Dex Spellman, and then Lyndon Arthur losing to Arthur, Alex Thoran, rematching Arthur, Stefani Koikov, and then Artur Beterbiev. It's either, I know Lyndon Arthur's not really in the same vein as Beterbiev and Kovalev, but there's a theme there, whereas if Yarde isn't going for the best available competition, he's fighting absolute puddings and road sweepers. And so, for my money, Anthony Yarde has all the ability in the world, but one of his major hang-ups is just the lack of development fights, really. Because he's not going to learn anything from bowling over these no-hopers. There was even a stage in Anthony Yarde's career around 2017 where he started referring to his opponents as food. He called Chris Hobbs hobnobs, which are biscuits for people who aren't in the UK. I'm assuming you don't get hobnobs overseas. I may be wrong. There was Richard Baragni, I think his name is, and Yarde called him biryani. There was Norbert Nemas Patty, and he called him the Patty. So that just goes to show the caliber of these opponents. Yarde wasn't learning anything from those fights, and I think that plays a role where he loses to Kovalev, and then he goes in against a complete no-hoper who he has no chance to really make amends or make adaptations to his boxing style and address the shortcomings that were displayed in the Kovalev fight. Same thing with the Lyndon Arthur fight. And that's kind of, I don't want to say excused, but he made amends overall because he beat Arthur in the rematch. But, Arthur's a domestic rival of his. Anthony Yarde clearly wants to be a world title. He wants to be a world champion because he's challenging for world titles. Beterbiev, in the lead up to that fight, Yarde was coming off a win against Stefani Koikov. So this matchmaking is terrible. And I understand the rationale, kind of, because they don't want Yarde, at least that's how I interpret it, they don't want Yarde to put too many miles on the clock, unless it's for a major fight for all the marbles or a big stake at the world title. They don't want him to do that. However, you have to strike a balance. You don't have to have war after war after war after war, fighting a killer after killer after killer. But at the same time, you can't have pudding after pudding after pudding. You have to strike a balance between fights that are, tough, but, you still have a realistic chance of getting through, and you're going to come out on the other side with some kind of development, some kind of improvement, even at a bare minimum, a greater understanding of your own ability at a bare minimum. But Yarde hasn't done that. And I think Tunde Ajayi has to take some responsibility in that regard, because not only is he Yarde's trainer, and I'm sure he has a say in that regard, but even if he had no say as a trainer, he's still Yarde's manager. So I think Tunde is playing a big role in the opponents that Yarde is facing. And ultimately, I think there are a lot of things that do need to be addressed from a technical performance point of view, but also in a managerial point of view. Where is Yarde going to go? Because he is, 31 now? And he's had 2 cracks at the world title, failed twice, come close, relatively close in the Beterbiev fight. But does he want to be a world champion, or is he happy to settle for world title challenger? Sometimes you have to switch things up. You have to go out there. You have to start taking a gamble almost. Take a break from Tunde. Just say, look, we've been together for however many years, but I need to see if I can take it to another level with somebody else. And I understand it's going to be a difficult thing to do, because they clearly are very close. Friendship, maybe even deeper than that. Maybe it's brotherhood. Maybe it's like Yarde is a father figure to Tunde, so he feels that loyalty. But if Yarde really wants to take his game to the next level, I think shopping around for a new trainer might be his best bet. However, that's just my opinion. Spent 17 minutes talking about Tunde Ajayi and Anthony Yarde, but it's frustrating, because Anthony Yarde is a fighter who I really like his style. I really rate his ability, but I feel like he is being held back. And as I say, even if he got a new trainer, maybe he'd still come up short. Sometimes that just happens. Sometimes it's the nature of it. Sometimes you're good, but you're not that good. But as I say, Anthony Yarde's getting up there in age. Maybe exploration's worth it. Shop around, see if you can find a trainer who can just get that bit more out of you, or add a little bit of something to your game to get some separation from the competition. That's just my opinion. Leave yours in the comment section below. Do you think Anthony Yarde should fire Tunde Ajayi? Yes or no? And leave your rationale in the comments. I'll get back to you. But for now, thanks for listening, and I'll catch you in the next video.